Well, in terms of sheer parliamentary bluster, Boris Johnson describing Keir Starmer as an Islingtonian Remainer who simply couldn't get over the Brexit result and needed to move on. But Sir Keir certainly landed some blows with questions which really didn't get answers, such as why did the government not let this report be published last year? Why did the Home Secretary 18 months ago warn that the Official Secrets Act was not fit for purpose? And yet it's only now we're hearing about legislation and talk of a possible register of agents, foreign agents in the UK. We think that means PR firms, corporate intelligence firms, lawyers who would be forced to register if they were working for foreign governments. But we don't know that's the case. And there's no sense of any of this legislation being imminent, which is perhaps surprising. And one does wonder whether, even though coronavirus has sucked a lot of air out of the room, what have civil servants been doing in the last 6-8 months about a fairly urgent issue such as Russian interference in British politics?
What are the spooks saying about all this?
The spooks are saying even less than they usually say. I would point you to a speech by Sir Alex Younger, the head of MI6. He's only given 2 speeches. This was his first at the end of 2016, so after the US election and after the Brexit vote. And he talked about subversion of the democratic process. The risks are profound, he says. They represent a fundamental threat to our sovereignty. Our job is to give the government the information advantage. So the question arises, if he knew that, why didn't he and other spies give the government the information advantage, which is what the committee was alleging yesterday? I think part of this is because the spies will point out that they are not self-tasking. They have to be told what to do by the government. They can't go rogue or off the books. And so the question arises, why didn't the government tell them to look into it? But I think there is a deeper issue, a cultural issue, if you like, which goes back to the spy catcher affair and allegations that MI5 and the CIA conspired against Harold Wilson when he was Prime Minister. The spooks do not want to get involved in British politics. If they had got involved in looking at the Brexit referendum, I don't think they would have sat on their findings. They would have been obliged to report them. And if they had reported them, then the toxicity which we've all lived through over Brexit for the last 4 or 5 years would have been even worse. And that, of course, I think is the main reason why the government probably did not want yesterday's report to come out more quickly than it did.
Jonathan, thanks very much. Well, Bill Browder is an activist and businessman who has campaigned about Russian interference in international affairs and joins me now. Mr. Browder, in response to this report, the Prime Minister, you will have heard, said today, no country is more vigilant in protecting against Russian influence than the UK. Do you believe him? Do you share that view?
It's not an accurate portrayal of reality. And I don't even know why he's being defensive. It's not his government that was being criticized. This is Theresa May's government and David Cameron's government and governments before that. This report is an extremely damning report. It goes into granular detail about how the Russians operate. There's a number of different lines of questioning and answering. And this is an opportunity right now for the government, his government, to say, okay, we're going to do something about it. And not just with words, but with actions. And some of the things that they've proposed would be very helpful. If lobbyists had to register, that would be helpful. If the National Crime Agency started to prosecute dirty Russian money, that would be helpful. If Russian kleptocrats who were coming to the UK and buying property had that property seized through the Magnitsky Act, that would be helpful. He needs to say those things.
They're big ifs, though, aren't they? Do you anticipate all or any of those things happening very soon?
Well, I think the report was so damning that they can't just do nothing. If they do nothing, that would be a true dereliction of duty. That would be true negligence. And the report lays it out very clearly what needs to be done. The report's it's not a partisan report. It was prepared by a committee that consisted of conservatives and Labour and Lib Dems and Scottish nationalists, and it's a report that's very, very clear, very objective, and needs to be responded to. And I think that by laying all these things out so clearly, it's going to be pretty hard for the government not to take some of these steps that are being proposed.
Well, part of your own evidence to the committee included talking about links between Russia, Russian money and members of the British establishment, including members of the House of Lords. Do you expect there to be further investigation into this now?
Well, the report was very damning about that. It talks about Londongrad. It talks about the Russian enablers, the PR firms, the lawyers, and so on, who are working for Russia in the UK. And in my own experience, what we discovered was that the Putin regime was hiring, or basically asking, oligarchs who had been enriched illegally by their regime to hire British members of the House of Lords to lobby their interests in London and in Europe against the national interests of the UK, and taking money to do that. And that's something that should not be allowed to happen. To the extent that it's not illegal, it should be illegal, and that's a huge, gaping loophole that needs to be closed. And I'm going to certainly be working on it with members of Parliament from all different parties to close that loophole.
But do you get the sense that there's the political will to change things if that does in fact mean losing Russian money?
Well, I think that there's absolutely the political will right now. As I said, it was a multi-party report, and political will comes incrementally, and it's kind of hard to stand up and say we should allow members of the House of Lords to lobby on behalf of Russia. Nobody's going to stand up and say that. And so the fact that you now have a report, an Intelligence and Security Committee report out there saying that, is extremely helpful for people like me who are advocating for this cause.